Hi, everyone, and welcome to another live episode of Marketplace Masters, sponsored by Merchant Spring, your go-to for vendor analytics and agency client reporting. Now, as part of these sessions and conversations, we dive deep into the challenges that Amazon vendors face as they strive to improve their performance on the Amazon platform. I'm your host, Paul Sonneveld, and today we're talking about the recent changes that are reshaping the Amazon vendor logistics landscape in the US as well as in Europe. Now, I have invited a very good friend of mine, Chris Koo, to join me and to share his expertise and perspectives on what's been happening, and more importantly, how vendors should adjust to and even take advantage of some of these changes. Now, let me give you a quick introduction. Chris is the founder and sales director at KooCommerce, a family-run software development business that helps 1P Amazon vendors process purchase orders and ASNs efficiently. His main passion is solving problems, engaging with businesses, and getting into the detail of Amazon vendor operations. Chris is a Cambridge graduate with a robust background in sales and joined the family business in 2019. Since then, he's led KooCommerce to process over $1 billion of orders, millions of items, of course, and helping companies really worldwide save time and money on Amazon orders. Beyond his professional endeavors, Chris enjoys his local church football group and walking in nature with his wife. Please join me in welcoming Chris as we dive into these critical developments and their implications for the e-commerce industry. Thank you so much for being with me today, Chris.
My pleasure, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Fantastic. Before we dive into our conversation, just a reminder for our audience. I know we've had many people sign up, despite the fact that it's summer. So, I'm absolutely honored. We've got so many people with us. It's a live session. So if you do have questions, mainly for Chris, please pop them in the LinkedIn comment section or in the comment section on YouTube, and we will try and do our best to get to all of them. So thank you very much. Okay, Chris, let's get straight into our topic. What have you seen? I mean, you're in a unique position because you're really on the purchase order side of the whole Amazon vendor ecosystem. From a logistics point of view and from a purchase order processing point of view, what are the big changes and themes that you've been observing really in 2024? What's new, what's different, what's on your radar and the radar of your clients?
Yeah, it's been a really, really busy year, really busy time. We've seen lots of movement in the supply chain space in Amazon last year as well as this year. Obviously, we have had quite extreme inflation, lots of supply chain issues. Price of containers has been coming down. We've had lots of news also on the 3P side to do with the FBA placement fees. That's been a real challenge for some brands and businesses, particularly those of you that operate a hybrid model. We've seen some challenges with forecasting. It's not something we personally get into that much, but a lot of brands are talking about trying to find better ways of predicting Amazon's ordering patterns. And then finally, as you know, we're going to get into more depth here. We've seen some of the changes about Amazon's requirements to their ASN, their version 2, both in the US and abroad, and then in Europe as well.
So quite a few changes there. I was going to add that at least this year, there's been no large bulk carriers or container ships being stuck in the Suez Canal.
You don't want to
So it
jinx it.
feels like everything has been very smooth this year. And you're right, container rates have come down. I do remember those crazy days. But yeah, let's talk more about some of those specific you mentioned there. I know there's been some talk about the new forecasting tool, but let's jump into the ASN topic. Before we get into what are the changes, what's all this, ASN, what does it stand for and what is it? Let's just go through the basics here.
Sure. So the ASN is the Advanced Shipment Notification. So when you send your goods to Amazon, you have to tell them which order, which item, which quantity, and which box. And you've got to send all that information in either through their interface or you can send it through an EDI message through the ASN 856 message to their systems. And really, it's letting them know we're sending you some products so that when they receive that, they can scan the items, receive it in on their side, and inbound those goods effectively and efficiently. If you don't do it, you run the risk of getting shortage claimed, quite extensively risk of shortage claimed, as well as they'll charge you for labeling issues, not on time issues, defect issues, and all sorts of other types of non-compliance.
Yeah, we'll get into those. So ASN, many years ago, before I was in the Amazon space, I used to work for a retailer, and we also used ASN. So I wanted to ask you: is ASNs something that's specific to Amazon, or actually is it an industry standard that is used by other channels as well?
Yeah, it's an industry standard. So if you ship to Target, Walmart, Tesco, John Lewis, any of the other major retail or wholesale partners, they might also be asking for ASN messages. They vary in how much depth and granularity you need to send them. Amazon is actually one of the more granular requirements. In fact, even with these latest changes, getting even more granular. So, for example, with some retail partners, you just need to say, "Hey, we're sending you 1,000 units of this product and 500 units of that." And that's enough. It's all to do with a hierarchy level. They have the shipment, order, tear, package, item hierarchy level. And some retailers don't need all of that granular information. They're just happy for you to say it's, purchase order this number, this item, this quantity, and that's it. But Amazon at a bare minimum requires you to break it down to the package level as well. So you need to say, actually, box 1 contains this item in 24 units, and box 2 is a mixed carton and contains 5 of this and 3 of that, and so on. And capturing, storing, and sending all that information can be a real difficulty for some vendors who are sending goods into Amazon, particularly if they're doing mixed cartons. So it's an industry standard, but the implementation of it often varies by retailer.
Makes sense. And perhaps an obvious question: why does Amazon want all that information in advance? Can't they just, look at the truck, open up the boxes, see what's there, and pay the invoice? I'm being a little bit facetious in asking that question, but what does Amazon do with that information? Why do they care?
Well, in theory, it helps them plan their inbound receiving process. So you can imagine there's many, many trucks arriving at a given Amazon fulfillment center in a particular day, and they use that information to book those slots with the carriers. I'm sure there will already be people watching who say, "Hey, but we booked the slot, we made the ASN, I went to request the delivery, and Amazon just rejected it, or they offered us one outside the delivery window." And the idea that they use that information to help their planning inbound process almost seems a bit laughable. But in theory, that's what they do with that information. And sending that in advance of the receive process means that when they receive your carton, they don't have to, in theory, open up each box and check each item in, but they can actually just pass it through a tunnel. They have cameras on all 6 sides, take a picture of the label, receive it in, and then let the robots handle it when they store it away in the fulfillment center. But if they don't have that information up front, it has to go to a problem-solving team. You have to get humans involved who have to scan each item one by one. And that's going to really greatly lead to the number of defects and discrepancies you have between what you believe you sent and what they believe was received. And that's one of the core problems that happens when it comes to shortage claims.
Yeah, I will. We'll definitely get. I promise the audience we will get onto those. But so tell me, what's changing in the world of Amazon Vendor right now when it comes to ASNs?
Yeah, so I've been making a lot of noise about this on my LinkedIn page, and you probably would have received the emails from Amazon as well, whether you are a US, North America vendor or a European, UK vendor. Even indeed, our Australian and New Zealand vendors are seeing the same emails too. But they're rolling out what they are calling ASN version 2. So for the UK and EU, that was launched June 1st. For the US and Canada, that was launched July 1st. So it's still very fresh news. And the big change that they're making is they're requiring pallet label information. So I mentioned earlier that the ASN, typically you have to track the order, the item, and the quantity and which box. So, purchase order 1, 2, 3, item A, quantity 24, box number 1. What they're asking now is another layer where you say box number 1 is on pallet number 1, or box number 26 is then pallet number 2, and then, boxes 100 through 200 is pallet 3. And that's the main change that they're asking for, which it means you then need to also label the pallet, but it does also mean that you then have to try and capture that information on the ground. So in the warehouse teams, when they're picking and packing the products, rather than just saying, I've got 1,000 cartons and it's gone into 5 pallets, you'll now need to break that down to say 1 to 200 is pallet 1 and 201 to 400 is pallet 2. And we saw a lot of noise in the community, and probably some of the people on this call kind of scratching their heads saying, hey, we don't actually currently capture that. We don't have a way of capturing that. That's going to present a real problem to our logistics teams. And is there something you can do to help us? Of course we can. But that was a bit of a challenge. And that's something which has made a bit of a wave through the whole community right now.
And what timelines has Amazon imposed? I mean, you mentioned the launch dates, but when do they expect compliance with that new direction or the extended information that's coming through the ASN?
Yeah, like you say, it is technically already live. For now, it seems to be a bit of a soft launch. So you can opt in. You can say, yes, I want to choose version 2. If you go through the Vendor Central interface, they've updated that. So you can now download and re-upload the spreadsheet that goes with that. It's a little bit clunky in my opinion, but it kind of works. Currently, there's no associated chargeback with it. Yesterday, actually, there was an email, at least on the Europe and UK side, where they say they're aiming for full deployment by mid-August. So that's probably, 3-4 weeks away. That's given vendors a grace period of about 12 weeks since their official launch of when they said it was live. I believe we're likely to see the introduction of a few additional chargebacks. Probably we called something like a pallet label compliance chargeback. For example, a package, if you don't put the label on the package, currently they're charging maybe 12 pence, 15 cents, or 20 cents, depending on your currency, for the package label missing. I think it will be reasonable to expect that Amazon will impose a pallet label non-compliance charge, potentially maybe in the region of 3, 4, probably £5 per pallet. It probably doesn't matter how many packages are on a specific box. But where I think we'll actually see the biggest impact financially for vendors won't so much be on the chargebacks, which could be on the scale of maybe £100, £200 a month, but probably more on the shortages side is where I suspect we'll see a much bigger impact for vendors. Even a few boxes going missing could easily already go over that £100 or £200 or dollars that I mentioned there. So I think that the shortages and the associated information related to that is going to be one of the things that brands really need to watch out for when it comes to both implementing or not adhering to this new requirement from Amazon.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as you speak to your client base, and I'm sure you're helping a lot of them, but how do vendors solve this? Is this around enhancing their own warehouse management or logistics system? Is this asking their 3PL to do something for them? What touch points in this whole supply chain does a vendor need to fix this particular, or not just fix, but respond to Amazon's request around ASN changes, or ASN, I think you called it version 2?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And really it comes down to having a very joined up conversation about the whole topic. A lot of times the problem and the pain is felt by one department, but the benefit or the reason for change is felt by a different one. So particularly when it comes to chargebacks and shortages, it might be the finance teams or the account director level, which is seeing that charge. But the people that really need to make the change and the ones that need to implement the change of process are going to be probably most likely in the warehouse side. So you called out there the 3PLs, the warehouse team, the logistics team. They're exactly going to be the type of people that need to be involved in that conversation. The first thing I would suggest is to scope out the full structure of changes. So, what is it we need to change? Then figure out how we can implement that. It might be a lot of businesses, already scan and monitor which items go into which pallets. That's fine. Some businesses won't do that at all. So you're going to need to build some sort of process in place for your Amazon shipments to do that. And then it will actually go about, well, how can we implement that? And then what's that going to look like? And the reality is it is going to take a little bit more time. It's going to take a little bit more work. It's going to take a process change. But the question is, what are the costs of not doing that? If you don't adhere to it, what could that look like? And as I mentioned earlier, that will be potentially charges and then most likely some impact on the shortage rates as well. So I would recommend a really nice joined up conversation between the different teams. And often having that conversation is a good place to start. Sometimes businesses can be a bit siloed between, who does what. And it takes some confidence and some courage for someone to say, hey, I think we need to chat between us all to make an improvement here.
As you're talking, I think about Bruno. I see him in the chat, and I'm already hearing him speak in my voice. He's probably watching this, so for sure. I want to ask you. you may not know the answer to this, or you may have a hunch, but you don't know the real answer. But so Amazon is implementing something. Clearly Amazon is getting a benefit from doing this. Right? Why roll this program out? Why even hire a program manager to communicate to all the vendors? Right? They're making a change. What are the benefits that you think they're looking for from this program? From V2 versus V1. Why change it, right? If it's not broken.
It's a good question. I think that, they want to be able to support vendors of all sizes. So the small parcel shipments aren't being changed too much by this. I called out pallet labels, for example, but one of the other changes they're making in version 2 is to allow carrier level tracking on individual small parcel shipments too. So if you've got small parcel shipments, version 2 also facilitates multiple tracking numbers for a small parcel shipment. That's a change only in the European region that already existed on the American side. But for the palletized shipments, I think it's going to improve their inbounding of pallet level shipments too, and overall increase that speed. So I think for them, it's kind of harmonizing across the board. So, we see an improvement on the US, and then actually the UK and EU is coming into line with that. I think that's one of their motivations. And also it's to do with helping to inbound their palletized shipment program, which we know that Amazon, goes to brands and says, hey, do you want to join Pix, or do you want to have some sort of consolidation model? It's not called Pix in the US, but that idea is, I think, something that they're keen to implement and keen to make as easy as possible for brands. And I think this standardization move is them just continuing to lean a bit deeper into making the supply chain as smooth as possible.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. I mean, clearly there's some benefits there. I'd love to hear if there's any vendors. I know we're probably a little bit, we're not yet completely in annual vendor negotiation cycles here, but I'm wondering to what extent you can use this a little bit, maybe to get your freight allowance down, or try and extract some of the benefit, because obviously you're incurring some additional cost here as well. Chris, before we move on to shortages, final question from me is around any differences. Is the program identical? I know, other than the timing, the rollout, June versus July, but are you observing any differences in the way this is rolled out, or the way that it's being implemented between Europe and the US? Is there anything you can point to, or is it homogeneous across the globe?
It seems pretty uniform. We actually heard about the communications about it much earlier in the US than we did in Europe. So probably from January or February, we knew this change was going to happen in the Americas. But it was only around April, actually, that those changes got communicated in the European region. So for most businesses, particularly in the UK, European space, there's almost been a bit of almost like, well, if we don't need to, let's not change kind of attitude, which is understandable, because vendor likes to just spring. They do this with everything they do, really, just like to, surprise you with a change. Typically, in our experience, we see that the US is the region where they'll launch change as a trial and then start to clamp down on it and to enforce it. And then it goes from there across the rest of the world. So I really wasn't surprised with that rollout model from them, that they started in, continental US and then actually moving over to Europeans with the launch out. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that same thing with the chargeback structure too. So the moment that I see a chargeback related to pallet label non-compliance appear in the US, I would think we're 3 to 6 months away from seeing that over here in Europe as well.
Yeah, makes sense. Actually, I'm just going to throw a question here, because the user, I don't know who this is coming through anonymous, but is asking exactly about the point you've been talking about. Do you believe that the quality of communication on this particular matter from Amazon has been clear enough to vendors? And do you believe that the majority of these vendors will be able to understand and contend with this in terms of future compliance changes? I mean, it's a big question. What's your perspective regarding the quality of your communications, and whether it's been clear enough to vendors?
Yeah, it's a good question. When it first came out, I was quite surprised with, I think, how much they were asking vendors to do in such a short time frame. In theory, the changes they write on paper don't sound too bad. But when you actually think about implementing them on the ground, I think it can be quite a tall order, I think, to say to a warehouse, hey, you've got 6 weeks to jump, and if you don't jump, we're then going to fine you for it. Which is why I think they have tried to extend a bit more of a grace period. But I'm not going to defend Amazon on this case. I feel like I think the guidance is quite clear what they need businesses to do, how a business actually goes about implementing that, and what that's going to look like on the ground, I think is going to be quite messy. And with regards to the second part of the question, I think there was a question about the point about, is it, will we be able to contend with future compliance charges? That is a good question across the board, generally speaking, with all compliance charges. Are vendors equipped with the sufficient information to be able to dispute them? And even if they do dispute them, is it sufficient for Amazon to back down? We see that with PODs on shortage claims or on delivery signatures from your carrier. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to actually get the dispute through with Amazon. That's true of both seller and vendor. But I think that having, obviously I'm biased on this point, but sometimes when you submit all the information by Amazon, they only keep it for 90 days. Whereas when you do it yourself, electronify it, capture it with scanners, all the kind of stuff that we help brands with, it gives you that record for all time. So if you're disputing something that's more than 90 days old, you go to Amazon, it won't be there anymore. They would have binned the shipment. So what vendors have to do is they have to scan their pick lists in, they have to store it in some Dropbox file somewhere and pull it back, to do that disputing process. And what we're trying to do through our platform is really arm vendors with, well, not arm, but like give them all the information that they need to be able to raise those cases and have that audit trail of who did what, when did it happen, and make that as clear as possible.
Yeah, give them the ammunition sort of ready to go at their fingertips. Let's change to shortages. I mean, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I'm keen to talk about shortages as well. Let's just set the scene. What are shortages? I mean, I know for some of us, we've spent our lives thinking about this, but for those who don't, what are shortages? And then we'll get into some practical questions there.
Yeah, if you don't know what shortage claims are, either you're very lucky or you're not too involved with the Amazon financing and shipping space. But it's basically very simply, it's a discrepancy between what you believe was shipped and billed versus what they believe was received. So you invoice 1,000 units and they say, hey, we only got 990, and they will shortage claim you for those 10 units. There's a lot to talk about on this whole space. We actually have a blog on our website with the 8 main root causes. We break down, here are the 8 major things that we see. In short, some of them are on the vendor, some are on Amazon, and some are on the carrier. And the general aim and the advice we give is to try and minimize them across the board, because shortage claims in general hurt cash flow, they hurt finance. It becomes a real pain having to do the remittance. Some of you, I don't need to tell you, having to have someone tie up, this was paid and it was shorted and then it was paid again, it was claimed, and you get a whole chain of events going on. So for some of the companies we're talking to, we actually see routinely over £100,000 or dollars or euros every single month in shortage claims, which can have a really serious P&L impact. And a lot of the time, it's considered to be either a cost of doing business or just part of the workflow that people think is associated with Vendor Central. But really what we're trying to say is go into what you can do to prevent them at the start, to do with the root cause. There's a lot of talk in the space a minute about reclaiming them. Many services are available that help with that. And I think that's a really great option to try and dispute them as best we can. We talked about disputing. But what our narrative is and what we're trying to encourage businesses to do is to have that conversation, look at their process, and implement systems that help to prevent them in the first place, and then reclaim the rest, and actually going to them at the root and then dealing with whatever comes out the rest of the machine is the better way to go, in our opinion. Because otherwise, well, not because you don't necessarily want to pay the commission fee to the reclaim company, but it will just help cash flow overall. It will help smooth out that curve so that you're not waiting 60, 90 days before that remittance actually comes back from Amazon.
Yeah. And look, of course, there's two sides to the coin here, right? Because if I send less units to Amazon's warehouse than what I'm invoicing Amazon for, then obviously the problem lies probably more on my end. But likewise, if I do send out units and I don't get recognition for all of those, and therefore Amazon deducts it off invoice and the like, that's probably the more painful scenario. In your experience, where do you see the bulk of the issues? And I'm talking root causes here in terms of things that you then go away and do something about. What side of the fence?
Yeah, there are a few big ones that come up quite regularly when it comes to the root causes of shortages. And it's a tricky and quite a sensitive topic because no one really wants to take the blame and you don't want to point the finger at a particular person. It's not really so much about saying, this person in the warehouse made a mistake, that's why you're losing £100,000 every month. It's more to do with examining the whole process as a structure, because no one's trying to make a mistake, but actually trying to figure out where the issue is going wrong. So, for example, a very simple process problem that can happen is that the invoice gets raised before the shipment is sent, and then you short ship something, and then the invoice isn't aligned with the shipment. Many people won't be doing that, but some people, they receive the order, they accept it, they invoice it, and then they ship it, perhaps via 3PL. 3PL reduces the quantity that was shipped, but doesn't communicate that back to the brand that they're doing the fulfillment for. They just say, we didn't have it, just shipped it. And that is the case of a genuine shortage where Amazon is, not able to resolve that discrepancy on their side. One of the other ones we see is when the goods are arriving at Amazon and they go through a manual receive process rather than through the auto receive efficient process. So we touched on that earlier, to do with going to the human-based problem solver team on Amazon's side. And that's where you're going to get the overage and the underage on what you shipped. Sometimes it goes the other way around. You send 100 units and we received 110, and then you have another purchase order where you ship 10 and they say they received 0. And across the two, the numbers match, but on a particular one, you get a shortage, and on the other one, you get an overage. And you can bet that Amazon won't say, oh, no problem, we'll pay you for the 10 on the other order. They'll just short you on the first one. But that's the kind of thing where you need to be quite attentive to that process. That's not something that we don't do the reconciliation and get into that detail. There are many people that do that, however. But they're the kind of common scenarios we see. I know we talked about it before we got on as well. We've even seen issues with the carrier as well, where actually the carrier themselves can be removing the labels or stripping them away. And that can be another source where it's not even your fault. It's not Amazon's fault, but there's a middleman who's taking your label that you've done hard work, all your warehouse have made it perfect. And then the carrier takes it and they just remove all that. They over-label your sticker or something else. And that can be a real pain, because that almost feels like it's beyond your control. And when Amazon get it, it's a genuine shortage from their side. And when you dispatch it, you did everything right. So they're probably the three big ones that I would call out. There's other ones in there like theft or catalog management can be a standard one as well. You send the single, but they're expecting the case, or vice versa. That can be another one to look at, particularly if you're managing a very large catalog size.
And cost price discrepancies, do they fall into this bucket as well, or is that a separate issue? Let's say, sorry, go ahead.
Well, normally, PQVs, if you're selling it for a particular price and they're invoicing at another one or buying another one, usually in the analysis we would treat them separately. But from a finance perspective, in terms of the shortage amount, it will appear similar to the finance department, because you'll say we invoiced $100 and we only got paid $90. Really, there we were just encouraged that the invoicing is based off the order price, not off what you think the order price would be. Otherwise, you're going to get misaligned. And that usually just comes down to integration and making sure your systems are well connected.
Absolutely. Makes sense. As we wrap up, Chris, I wanted to just ask you, obviously we're sort of halfway through the year. We've just gone through Prime Day. What are the most interesting and perhaps most painful, most educational moments, let's put it this way, that you have seen as you've worked with other vendors this year? Things that those vendors have really learned from that may be helpful to our audience as we close out. Are there, I used to call them like peels and banana skins or something like that, right? Things that what can we learn from some other vendors that you may have observed?
Yeah, wow. I mean, I feel like we could talk about this for a very long time, because there's lots of learns, and having those roundtable discussions and events where vendors get together is it's a really great time to share best practice. One of the things I would call out is we were able to reduce shortages and actually prevent them for a company by up to 90%. So their shortage rate dropped quite substantially. They were getting, like we mentioned earlier, hundreds of thousands each year, and actually reducing that to just a fraction of what it was. And looking at that process where we went to their warehouse, talked with their teams, their labels got improved. That receive process was much, much better for them. So actually being able to reduce shortage rates by 90%, it's an absolutely massive impact for a company. So I would say to answer your question, I would say not to be complacent about operational or shipment defects within your process. Not to just accept them as a cost of doing business, but to really take a whole account overview. We need to have a good focus on P&L, profitability and making sure that your Amazon account is not just working on the top line, sales are growing, but the underneath processes are also still in line with where you want them to be. And having a good vigilance on that, being able to have those conversations internally and actually ask, should we be spending hundreds of thousands each year on defects and paying lots of time for the accounts team to go and reconcile this stuff? Or is there a way we can improve that? And for some companies, it will be just what it is. They're doing the best they can, but it doesn't hurt to ask the question. And, we touched on Bruno earlier, and I think that, his narrative there is really relevant to that. And also a lot of these agencies out there who are looking at preventing and reclaiming shortages. Really, there's a whole conversation that I would encourage companies to have about, are we doing the best practice? Are we implementing these changes efficiently? Obviously, if people need help with it, we're happy to help and happy to talk. A lot of what we do is just, let's have a conversation about it. Tell us how you work. Tell us what you're currently facing, and if we could be of service to you. But I would encourage that internal conversation, the dialogue, and a good review of the account, taking into consideration all those additional wider factors.
Thank you, Chris. Unfortunately, we are getting to the end of, we're past the end actually, but we're still live for some reason. We are getting to the end. You've already mentioned this. I'm sure there are vendors that are watching this or going to be replaying this later that are maybe just want to sort of go a bit deeper on some of these topics. You mentioned you're very open to having conversations. That's where it starts. What is the preferred way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, we understand that every business is unique. Every business is different. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Standards are standards, but the way they get implemented for you in your specific context will likely look different depending on how many warehouses you have and lots of other factors in your product type and so on. But yeah, feel free to reach out to us. We have our website, kucommerce.com, also our Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or X, I should say. Lots of different places you can reach us, or just send me a message personally on LinkedIn. Or a friendly bunch, and we'd be glad to hear from you and help you. We've got phone numbers on our website for both the US and UK.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for taking us through some of the logistics changes that are happening, especially ASN version 2 and all that fancy pellet labeling and I guess some of the consequences of not doing that. So thank you so much for taking it through that. Appreciate your practical tips on shortages too. Thank you for being super generous. So yeah, thank you, and I look forward to having you again on one of our episodes in the near future. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm sure we'll speak soon.
All right, everyone. That is it for today's episode of Marketplace Masters. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found this session on the recent changes, particularly around ASNs from an Amazon vendor perspective. I hope you found it useful. If you are hungry for more, don't forget to visit our free video on demand library on our website. It's really a treasure trove for all sorts of Amazon vendor insights. Just head to merchantspring.io and go to our research section, and you'll find it there. Of course, I would be remiss not to say, if you're a vendor and you are looking for much better analytics around your vendor performance or hybrid performance, feel free to reach out to me or book a demo on our website, and we'd love to share and, like Chris does, have a conversation to work through if Merchant Spring can help you. Lastly, I am all ears in terms of what you cover next. If you're an Amazon vendor and you're enjoying these podcasts and you've got a particular question or topic that you want us to tackle, send it through and I will do my best to get the relevant expert on the show and tackle that topic together. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, take care.